Hello and good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to today's Envoy Conversation event, the fourth in our virtual global talent series. We have a great event ahead of us, but before we get there, there are a few housekeeping items that I would like to go over first. First, this event is being recorded, and everyone in attendance will receive a link to download the recording after today's live event. The link to download will be sent out tomorrow afternoon via email, so please keep an eye out on your inbox for that message. If for whatever reason you do not receive that message, please let us know and we'll be sure to resend it your way. Additionally, we encourage you to ask some questions throughout the event today. To do so, you should type them in via the GoToWebinar question box that you should see on your screen. So type that question in and we'll try to get to it during the dedicated audience Q&A session. Additionally, given this is a virtual event, please excuse any audio or video hiccups that may occur throughout the event. We are not anticipating anything, but given that we are all remote, video and audio may go in and out here and there. If for whatever reason you're experiencing severe audio or video issues, please try logging out and then logging back in to try to fix that. Again, we are not anticipating anything. So moving along, for those that are unfamiliar with Envoy Global, I would like to talk briefly about Envoy. So for nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. Envoy combines a top-ranked legal team and innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 100 countries, has grown 37% year over year, and we work with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. And introducing my colleague from Envoy, Lindsay DeJohntis, the VP of Human Resources. Here at Envoy, Lindsay is responsible for directing all aspects of the employee lifecycle. She is an experienced HR and recruiting professional with 15 years of experience in fast-growing, highly competitive industries. And Lindsay leverages data-backed decisions to effectively attract, grow, and retain the best talent possible for the organization. So with that, Lindsay, I'm going to turn things over to you to take it away.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. And I'm so thrilled to be here hosting this conversation with Horst Gallo. He's the Vice President of Global Mobility at IBM Human Resources. Horst, so glad to have you. You're appointed Vice President of Global Mobility for IBM Human Resources in November 2018. He leads a global team to ensure IBM has the right people in the right place at the right time by facilitating the successful deployment of talent around the world. Since joining IBM in 1999, Horst has served in multiple executive roles globally, living and working for IBM in Europe, China, and the US. It's so great to have you, Horst.
Well, great to be here, Lindsay. Thank you.
Well, let's get started. We're going to just dive right in to our conversation and really want to take a look at your career in mobility. You've worked for IBM for over 20 years and in a variety of roles, as we just saw. How do you think this career path helped you in the long run, both in terms of understanding the ins and outs of IBM and your own mastery of HR, talent acquisition, and global mobility?
Yeah, so I guess I was very fortunate because I enjoyed a very international career, as you were pointing out just before. I see a career as a puzzle, and any kind of role what you have or any kind of project what you're doing helps to put the different pieces together. You finally get actually to a full puzzle. I was very fortunate actually to do many aspects of talent management over the years, starting off from workforce management to recruitment, succession planning, learning, leadership development, and skill development. That actually helped a lot. And of course, over the years, it is really about, I was able to work at country level, at the geo level, at market level, and then of course at global level. When you work all of that together, I would think that the most important thing for me, from my career point of view, is that switching between functional roles, specialist roles, like in a function, and then with generalist roles. So you can actually move back, and then one side, of course, have that point of view, but also then, of course, apply it with your client, the business units. I think that really helped overall to understand actually IBM in a better way, because it's a big organization, and make it more successful.
Yeah, and I think it's seeing both that specialist role and then generalist and then going into one area is the beauty of HR, and mobility at its core. Let's turn back the clock a little bit and, you know, looking at when you first started your career in Germany, what initially drew you to your first role? And how did you end up pivoting into HR and global mobility today?
Yeah, so when I was in Germany, the last role was actually in an insurance company. And I was not working in traditional HR. It was more like on the edge between finance and HR. I think you would call it today analytics, because what we were trying to do is actually analyzing big sales organizations, actually helping with the strategic aspect about selling more insurances into the organization, and helping, of course, the productivity of the sales force overall. And then I I switched completely. I wanted to learn English and live in London, so I joined IBM, and I was able actually to get into the HR practice by starting off in the service center when IBM first created that in 1999 in Europe. I think it was that time when everything was centralizing, everybody was consolidating things, and we were trying to build an HR organization centrally, consolidating many of the country functions like recruitment or other areas and into that part, and it was really, really interesting.
That's so interesting, especially on the insurance side. I actually accidentally got into HR through insurance, so to speak. So that's not always the path into HR, but it's a good connector. So let's talk about, obviously, in your career, there's a huge value in our space on mentorship. Sorry, and the mobility community is a very welcoming, very tight-knit group where everyone is happy to, you know, welcome these newcomers. Was there anybody in particular who helped and mentored you at different points in your career? And what advice would you have for young professionals looking for a mentor in the mobility space?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. So I think when I joined the mobility industry, especially here, there's many people who reached out, and it's really a very small kind of community who are really tied together. I do believe in mentorship. I always had, as part of my roles, two types of mentors. One is really about in HR to help with career and that growth part. On the other side, of course, also as I was going into generalist roles, somebody in the business who can actually tell me about, is the things what you're doing actually right or is it not? And it helps you from a business point of view in the work actually what you do. But when I came into mobility, there was a lot of people actually reaching out, especially some of the companies who are helping to bring people together for informal networking. And that helped a lot, because of course it actually helped me very quickly to get into a area where you have a lot of peers and network around that. And everybody, as you're saying, actually is willing to get on a call, work out around that. I think overall, you were saying about was there anybody in particular? Not necessarily so much actually in the mobility industry, but I remember, of course, our former CHRO was very well, because she was somebody as well who brought me into global mobility, because she was talking about transformation and change. And as you have seen, I've done a lot of things actually in different countries, being on the receiving end of mobility. And at one point, of course, she was asking me actually to lead global mobility for IBM. And that was an area where I was not necessarily so enthused, because it's more a delivery organization, but then actually talking about the need for transformation and change. And that really is an exciting space for me, which actually helped. And a mentor, of course, guiding you through these processes and helping you understand what you can get out of that is a really important aspect for me.
Yeah, having that person and mentor in your space to show you, like, here's where the puck is going. If we use that analogy,
Yeah.
here's where it's going. I need you to be there. Having that coach is important, because as HR, there's so many things going on. It's where do you go next is a challenge, and it's very akin to what mobility actually is. But on, and kind of alluding to that, the evolution of the mobility industry, IBM has been a key player in the technology space for decades, and has recently focused its business on things like Watson and tech-enabled process improvements. What role has technology played in the evolution of the mobility industry specifically, and where do you think it will take us in the next 5 to 10 years? Again, kind of where is it going?
That's a very, very broad question, but a very interesting one, right? So, I mean, it's true. IBM, of course, its strategic focus is really about helping our clients in the transition actually to the cloud and the digital reinvention. And of course, technology, as you're talking about Watson, our version of AI, blockchain or quantum is really on that leading edge for that. And I'm lucky to say, because in IBM, HR has been always in the forefront of using technology internally around that. So we were actually starting off very early on using automation or using chatbot technology to communicate actually with our employees around that. On the other side, of course, we have also done, of course, a lot of stuff actually around analytics and AI, having Watson, of course, in-house, where we started often using that in order to predict more and help the manager actually make decisions around that. And that's, of course, the same actually true for global mobility in IBM. We're using chatbots since many years to communicate with our assignees and our internal teams when it comes to policy around that. And I think the next few years, of course, are going to be even more interesting. I think 5 to 10 years, 5 years maybe from now, because 10 years is a very, very long time for me, especially in technology. So many things actually change very quickly. But I do think in 5 years' time or so, it's going to be very, very normal for any company to use VR, AR technology, using blockchain, how we actually transmit things, especially in immigration, as you might probably know. I think there's a lot of opportunity actually there. And I think it's probably not even going to take that long, because companies are very catching up, and the technology is actually evolving so quickly, which is changing a lot, of course, of what the industry actually can do. So technology for me is a very, very important aspect. And of course, I'm happy to work in a technology company like IBM.
Yeah, I think I've always spent my career in kind of the tech space, and I know that if I were to redo it, I'd still be in tech in some way, but I love HR too much. But you mentioned, 5, 10 years is a long forecast out, and I think with the catalyst of COVID and the pandemic, it has really kind of ignited change across industries. We're seeing companies quickly adapt processes, as you just said, and policies in order to continue serving their customers, right? Like, you can't totally change your business. You had a good idea at the beginning. Let's keep going with that. You just have to tweak, how policies or processes, or of course, technologies do that. And at the same point, you have to create a safe work environment for your employees, no matter where they are. And obviously, in a pandemic, it's ubiquitous for everybody. Getting to the question on this, where do you think, or where do you see the mobility industry on the other side of COVID? And what changes do you think are here to stay?
Yeah, I think COVID, of course, is an area which has actually accelerated digital transformation a lot. I mean, we see that with our clients. When I talk to our business from a consulting point of view, we see kind of two types of clients actually out there. One is I call them more the traditional kind of companies who just they can't wait to get back to where they were before, and that's for me very interesting to see, because I'm not sure if we're going to go ever back to where we were before. I think the other companies, the other set what we are seeing is really that they're embracing change. They're actually relooking and reimagining the way how work gets done, and anything actually around that. And I think that's going to be the companies who are going to be having a big advantage going forward, because they're using this time to really accelerate the digital transformation. We've just made a poll with all of our 340,000 people, and it was interesting for us. We asked about how do they see work going forward, And 2/3 of our workforce was saying, yes, they would like to go back to the office, but for a different context, to network, to learn, to meet on a regular basis, to build their community, to mentor, to learn around that. And then, of course, there was 1/3, which thought like, okay, I don't have to go back to work again. And they were really the ones where they were established, where they were longer serving in the company. And we had to remind them, actually, look, somebody has done that with you before, have mentored you, have actually helped you grow, and now it's your turn to give that back around that. That's what we're seeing. I think the workplace is not going to be any more the same than we're seeing today, but it's going to be that meeting place where you go and actually get information, do innovation around that, and then of course you go back home and actually do your normal work around that. And I see that very interesting because it changes the mobility industry overall completely, because many things actually will be very different. I think we also see consolidation of companies, because the numbers I think are not going to go back in the same way than it is actually today. We see a lot of demand for virtual assignments, and I think we as a function and as an industry also have to figure out how we can help that, how we can help grow people and get that cultural aspect of it by shorter term assignments, putting of course actually technology in the forefront, but of course making sure that of course the individual, which is very, very important, is actually taking care of that as well. So I think it's an interesting part, and I think we can add a lot more value when we step out of our small context and actually look at it in a much, much broader way than we have done historically.
Yeah. If I had a, like future looking piece of me, back in January and February, I would have said, I just want I want the human experience to continue to be a big part of HR. And ironically, it is so much of that, but it is weighing more on technology and processes to support the mobility space in general. And obviously it's clear we have a lot to keep tabs on here, and everything that's going on. In addition to the pandemic, it's just the mobility space is changing so much. How do you stay informed about these changes within the mobility industry and in between, social media groups and groups like Worldwide ERC? What outlets or channels do you recommend for those trying to stay up to date?
Yeah, so you mentioned LinkedIn. LinkedIn for me is really one of the very special kind of tools, because you can really create communities, you can connect with people, you can follow their content a lot around that. But as you said before, mobility is a very tight kind of community, and once you're actually in the network, there's a lot of things, of course, what is going on in regards to sharing or sessions which are happening. I've made it actually one of my mentors that every week I talk to one of my peers out in the industry. And what I have found, of course, is that actually the problems are very, very similar across, but it's interesting to have a conversation, to share best practices, or just to talk about different approaches. And that actually helps you overall to get an external point of view on the things actually what you're doing. You talked about Worldwide ERC. I think Worldwide ERC is a great community. You can connect with many people. You can get forward-looking information around that. You can also, of course, actually get connected with the community, like with other kind of parts around that. I think all of these things are very, very important for me. I always like to share because I believe this is important. And by sharing, of course, actually you get to know other people. And I like specifically people who have a different point of view, maybe a strange point of view, because then actually you're challenged in your assumptions, and you can see how you can change that actually overall around that.
Yeah, I think that's the balance in HR talent acquisition, is always like, help me know what I don't know in these conversations and in the networking. And HR and mobility people are people. And that brings, up kind of our next topic is, as I kind of alluded to earlier, really the human side of HR and human side of immigration and mobility. And one of Envoy's guiding principles is to never lose sight of the person behind the petition. What advice do you have for managing people and supporting foreign national employees going through that sponsorship process?
Yeah, I think what Envoy is doing is exactly right. I think that the person, of course, is really important behind that. Having moved, of course, I think 7 times or so, I know how vulnerable it is the time actually when you make a decision or before you actually make a decision until everything is done and settled. You don't know many of the things. So you're really looking for guidance and help, and having, of course, a partner who can actually help you with some of the things is really important. I do believe one of the most important things, of course, is having clarity around that, clarity on timings, predictability of what is going to happen, and at the same time, of course, also having information which is consumable. Because I think when you're getting on an assignment, especially, everybody wants to give you as much information as possible, and at that time, you're trying to wrap up the old job, get a new job done, figure out with your family actually what is going on, especially if you have kids in school, and trying to do all of that at the same time. When everybody's trying to be helpful and sending you pages and pages of documents, that's very, very often not the right one. I think we have to change a bit the way how we operate, and change as well. In the past, I think in the mobility industry, we have optimized a lot on the process. And I think we have to change the equation completely and pivot actually from optimizing for process to optimizing for experience. Because if you put that person in the forefront, you would communicate in a very different way, and you would make sure, of course, that person hand-holding information actually is there. It's of course difficult because today many countries are getting a lot more protectionist. Not only the US, but we see that in parts of the world, and that of course actually goes against that. You don't have the predictability of what is going to happen. You have a lot of uncertainty, and that is in this space a very, very difficult one. And therefore, of course, the thing what you said in the very beginning, yes, you need to actually have help of technology, which is really important in order to scale things, but that personal contact, that high touch environment is really absolutely important for that person. And that mix is difficult because of course everybody is trying to drive productivity, have cost cutting, but at the same time, of course, you need to provide a different experience. And therefore, changing the process towards experience is really one of the most important things, I believe.
Yeah, and it's so not only personal and nuanced, as you said, but it, someone needs, it is so personal in the process. Would you mind sharing a story, at some point from your career, that brings to light that human impact of immigration and mobility on, someone's life or family or career?
Yeah, I guess if I think back on my, worst experience in immigration was probably when we were moving. So we were at that time actually living in Prague in Czech Republic. And you have to know, I'm German, my wife is Spanish. My first son was born in the United States. My second son was born in Czech Republic. And then we had to move to China. And of course, getting all of the documents in the right language with the kind of information and the right stamps or so was really a challenge around that. Luckily, of course, we were actually helped by a immigration provider overall around that. But it was interesting in the beginning. I had like 4 different calls with this immigration provider in different countries, and they all were trying to help me, but nobody was consolidating, and nobody was actually taking the lead and actually making that happen until maybe 2 or 3 weeks into the process, where I had to do myself and actually bring everybody on board, and then figure out how do we do that, how can we actually connect the things. So it was really a terrible experience. Quite frankly, it was not with Envoy, but it showed to me, of course, that you need to put the employee in the forefront and not the process, because from a process point of view, it makes all sense that you actually have this conversation with somebody in the UK or somebody in Germany and somebody somewhere else. But in the end of the day, it's the same kind of process around that. And if you don't put the employee in the forefront, you end up overlapping, and the employee actually has to drive the process, which cannot be. So that was one of the experiences I had.
Well, that's unfortunate, but obviously it's impacted your view and also kind of making sure that processes and systems in place can hopefully eliminate something like that. And
yes.
I think, being in the mobility space, you get a lot of information, and I think it's also for people getting into their career, they think HR or talent acquisition, and it's so much bigger, and there are these niche areas like mobility, but you need to make sure that you stand out and you are vocal, not only in your company, but just in the community. how on a personal branding, and if you wouldn't mind kind of talking more about personal branding, what 2 pieces of advice do you have for young professionals who are just getting started in HR or mobility?
Yeah, so maybe I start off more generically. I think one of the most important things actually what any HR professional or anybody who is in the working world today can do is actually having a growth mindset and continuous learning, because we have a half-life of skills, maybe even less than that. And of course, it means actually that you have to continuously transform yourself in order to be relevant to the work what is actually required going forward. For me, the other thing, of course, is also don't take the easy things, because the easy things, they will get you somewhere. But I have found that over my years, when you have roles nobody wants to do or jobs nobody wants to do, and you take that on and you make that a success, that's a lot more impactful for your own kind of growth and learning, but also, of course, for the branding and how people actually see you. It's not about being afraid of making mistakes or failure. It's about trying to embrace that and actually making the best out of that. I think that will help a lot more, and it should get you back into this branding aspect when people see you, of not being afraid of actually getting things done and embracing difficult parts. That will help you in the future for sure.
That's such a great point, and I'm like, thank you. Tell me more about that. That is that advice that you need to learn at some point in your career. Is like, take the project that is ugly and icky and might be super hard, but try. I think is a big part of it. And to your point, it does get you that brand recognition. You can kind of stair step that into the next one, and as you did, kind of the generalist to specific, back to generalist is a really good option for a path. And obviously you display that well on LinkedIn, and obviously we know LinkedIn is extremely important these days regardless of your industry.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why HR and mobility professionals should develop a personal brand on social media, especially in today's more virtual environment that we're in. How do you get started if you're new to the industry and maybe you don't have a lot of connections or subject matter expertise? What are the steps that you would recommend taking?
Yeah, so I think I would start off in saying, like, maybe it's not so much driving the branding, but actually trying to see what you can get out of it and what you can actually give. And I think LinkedIn for me is a community where you can really connect with a lot of different people. And the more actually you bring to the conversation, the more you share, the more insights you can provide, the more you get out of it. Because of course, when people actually are interested in what you're sharing or what your thoughts are, they come to you for conversations, and you connect with very interesting people who are then sharing, of course, other content which is very new to you. And I found that actually really interesting, and I've made a conscious choice actually a few years ago to actually try to do a bit more, and I think it paid back a lot, especially in the mobility industry, where you said before, everybody is willing to help and everybody is willing to connect. And it's, in the end of the day, it's always the same people, because it's a very nitty kind of gritty kind of community around that, where everybody's trying to do that. I realized at one point actually that, of course, I love to read, and I started actually having a posting on LinkedIn about some of the books what I was reading, and that actually started a lot of conversations about why certain things actually are good from that book and why certain things are not good, and how we can do it differently. And I found that outside in view, that challenging of perceptions, really interesting. So I started actually to do a lot more about that. And now it seems like people actually asking for recommendations on book on this specific topics, which I'm very happy to do and have a conversation about. But it's also, I realized, I don't know, half a year or so ago, that several of authors came to me and actually asked for book reviews. And for me, this is actually great, because of course you can get to know the authors themselves, you can get to know their ideas and why they are doing certain things, which is a very different conversation than usual. And so again, the more you put in, the more I think you can get out. And yes, you have to be careful in some of the times, but I think there's a lot of value actually in that. In the end of the day, you're not doing it because you want to have a brand or so. Yes, it needs to be consistent, but it's really about how you can actually improve your network and how you can get things done with the help of everybody else in the community what you have.
Well, I mean, it's like you teed it up right there. And now the question is, so what are you reading? What are the books that are on your list that are when you have time? What are you reading right now?
Well, I read a lot of things, and at the moment, actually, I read Simon Sinek, The Infinite Game. I actually did not want to read it because I was a bit disappointed. I'm probably one of the only ones. I was a bit disappointed about the book about why, because I thought his TED Talk was fantastic and he said it all, and the book was too long for that. But a friend of mine gave it to me, and actually I found it is actually a lot more deep than I thought it would be. So I'm actually very happy to read that. On the other side, I read, probably laugh about that, but I read a series what my son has started reading, which is Wings of Fire. And it was really nice when we both actually read the books together, and then actually we talk about characters and we talk about scenes and why certain things are done and not. So I find that very interesting because it actually helps me as well to take my mind off the business kind of world and takes me out of the normal kind of parts.
Yeah, the former English teacher in me is just fascinated and can't wait till my son gets to that age. Right now he's in the Elmo phase. So, but no, that's awesome. And I have a couple more, kind of fun questions if we can. Obviously being in the mobility space and you've traveled and lived all over. On your first, kind of looking back, where has been your favorite place that you've traveled for your career, and tell us more about that.
Yeah, so for me, the favorite place on earth is actually Southeast Asia. Very clearly, I've been lucky to live in Asia now for 6 years overall, and I've probably traveled many different places. That's my favorite tourist destination. I love Asian food, so from that side, it's probably not very good for me because I grow. But I have to say this is definitely the best place I've been. My favorite town or my favorite city is Hong Kong, and there's nothing better for me because I was responsible at one point for Greater China Group, and I was going to Hong Kong like every month or so. So my favorite thing to do was always to go down to the 7-Eleven, buy a bottle of beer, and then go and sit on the Kowloon side and just enjoy the skyline of Hong Kong Island in the night. And I could do that for hours without actually talking. That's my kind of part I would do.
That's amazing, and I think we should probably have a second session to talk all about Hong Kong because it's been that was one of my favorite travel places. Before I get into our last question to our audience, be sure we've got a Q&A available. If you look at the slide right now, you can submit your questions online in your control panel. Our team will actively look at our questions and ask some to Horst after we wrap up here. So do so now if you have any questions for obviously Horst. If you have them for me, I'll take them, but please, this is definitely such a treat to have you. Final question here is on that travel note. We're a little bit in a different climate right now, but on your next list, where will be the first place you travel for personal reasons once we're able to kind of get back into the new normal?
Yeah, so I think there's like two answers I probably would give, because my first answer is definitely I want to go back to Europe, because living in the US by my parents and my wife's parents actually are back home in Germany and Spain. And with COVID, of course, we have not had the chance actually to see them. That's certainly going to be the first place, because we normally spend the summer together. At least our children, they get language classes in both Germany and Spain, because they would spend the summer there. And that, of course, unfortunately didn't happen this year. And Spain specifically, but also Germany, was, of course, very hard hit with COVID. So that's definitely going to be the first place to travel. But then second, once all of that is over, I would want to go back to China. We've lived twice in China, once in Shanghai and Beijing, and we just miss it. Every day also when we talk with our kids, they sometimes feel like they are Chinese more than anything else. And of course, we would like to go back because it is such a fascinating country. And I would definitely go back there very, very quickly.
Awesome. Well, this is wonderful, and I'm sure we could talk more and more about your wonderful travels and kind of how your career has developed over time, and how, you know, overall mobility in HR is being kind of expedited to its new self with not only the pandemic, but technology and kind of IBM also leading the way in how we manage people globally. So really want to thank you for all of this. Trying to see if there's any questions coming through. Let's see. Do we have any? I'm going to toss it over to Eric, who is leading the way.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, and thanks, Horst. We have a couple of great questions that have come in since the start of the event, so let's just jump right into them. The first question here is for you, Horst. I want to become an immigration pro for both our employees and managers. Where should I start? I haven't found many educational programs. Are there certain associations or books or groups that you recommend for jumping into immigration/mobility?
So immigration is very difficult for me to answer because I'm still on the same path. Maybe Lindsay, you have a better view around this one. I feel like many companies, at least in the bigger ones, they're working together with an immigration provider, and most of the immigration providers, whether it's Envoy or Fragment or others, they have a lot of information not only on the websites, but also they have webinars which they're constantly having. The same is of course true actually for Worldwide ERC, who is hosting a regular kind of session on immigration. That I found really, really helpful. But is it going to be as detailed as you wanted? I'm not 100% sure, because it sounds like you're really interested in getting deep into that, and that we're probably not going to be enough for that. And I've not found a part out there which is really helping with that. Even Worldwide ERC is an example. Actually, they have badge programs and learning programs, and they're very, very helpful, but they're not going necessarily in that detail that you can really practice it going forward. I found, at least from the conversations what we had in our team, that it is many years of practicing it and really doing the work that actually helps most of the people actually develop around that, in addition, of course, to the degree. But Lindsay, you're more an expert probably than me, so happy for you to chime in because you were offering before.
Oh goodness. I would say I would 100% agree. There's, you know, there's not going to be a checklist or a specific thing to get really deep. I think going back to what you said earlier, Horst, on this topic is dive in, you know, just start going and start finding different things and start doing. If there's an immigration provider that you're currently using, get close with them. I know our team at Envoy, as our CRM team and our affiliated law firm, they are the experts, and I learn from them every day on the details. And the one thing I have learned is not every visa is the same. Even if it's the same visa, even if it's a green card or an H-1B or an L, every experience is different. And I think that it goes back to what you were talking about before, Horst, is really centralizing that experience for the employee is so critical. That's going to be your biggest driver to get deep into immigration, is understanding how it impacts your employees, for sure.
Great.
All right.
Thank you both for answering that. Moving along to the next question. Even in my smaller company, it always seems that mobility is the last team to know when there is a business initiative that is going to require mobility support. Horst, IBM is massive by comparison. How do you build relationships with the business to ensure that mobility isn't an afterthought, going up against impossible expectations?
Yes, so this is a very, very key question. We're actually talking a lot about that because historically, or at least maybe not historically, maybe still the same. In many companies, mobility is a little black box. You hand something in when you make a decision, and the mobility actually helps you move a person from point A to point B without mobility actually having any influence on the decision itself. And that means, of course, that you are really executing something which is happening actually in other parts of the company. And with that mindset, with that kind of organizational setup, it is very difficult, of course, to be strategic and be connected to the rest of the business. For me, of course, with my experience over many years in different parts of the business, I have a lot of connections with that. But what we are trying to do actually is when we try to get out of this box and actually expand the horizon, is to actually add value. And that value comes from the fact of, for us, analytics. So we have stood up an analytics function in the team who is really looking at historical data, and not just on, look, this is actually the number of assignments what we're having, this is the cost what you have, is that is helpful, but it's not so much. But it's really about then going into new technology like Watson, and saying, okay, this is the profile of people who have been successful in a certain place. And we're seeing actually that, of course, the cultural component of it. So for example, Americans going into China is not so successful, while actually Europeans going to China is much more successful. And that with that information equipped, you can actually have a conversation with the business and the other HR functions to try to influence that. For me, this is really important. And again, as a mobility function, I felt like often that we have a lot of experts, but they're all very narrow. They have only been in mobility for 10-15 years in the same kind of environment. And I encourage a lot of the people actually to move out of mobility and come back, because that actually helps you understand the business in a much better way, but also understands what the other functions in HR are doing, and you can connect a lot better with succession planning or internal career mobility, which in many parts of the business actually is much more important around that. So for me, it's about trying to create that value. And I think one factor can be analytics, because it helps you really actually get the details, so you can actually influence decisions and not just be an execution part of something. There's of course a lot more than that, and I think a lot of our mobility functions actually struggle with that, because it is true, many times it is an afterthought, and you have to fight for getting that seat at the table, but you can only of course do that once you add value, because otherwise why would you be there?
Great, thank you for such a detailed answer to that. Horst and Lindsay, a couple minutes ago, you were both talking about travel, so kind of going back to that particular topic. Obviously there's a lot of unknown about COVID-19 pandemic and borders reopening, but beyond just getting back into the office versus work from home, do you have any sense of how business travel is going to be impacted, especially the longer project-based assignments or relocation as part of leadership development?
Let me go first, and then I'll invite you to add, or maybe correct me. So I do think that business travel it's impacted significantly, right? Because I mean, we're seeing actually a slowdown of 80-90% in some of the parts, and I think it will continue, of course, in the next year or so dramatically. What I see is when I talk to our colleagues in the consulting business, where this is of course very common. You sign a contract, you go somewhere and actually deliver that contract. That like I was referring to that before, we see two sets of companies. One set of company is really, they feel like, even of course they have done it now in the last 6 months, that virtual is not possible, and they want actually everybody back in the organization. We see a lot of demand actually, that they actually asking our consultants now to come on site, while they have not even figured out what they do with their own kind of people. But on the other side, we have a lot of clients who are now questioning, do we really need people on site for delivering projects? Because in the last 6 months, of course, it was possible. Productivity was still very high. In the innovation space also, that is maybe not necessarily always the case, but on the delivery side, it was very high. And of course, they are asking us actually to rewrite projects and contracts to see if we can deliver some of the stuff actually much more virtual than they have done before. I do think that instead of maybe this 3, 4, 5 months kind of projects, it's going to be a lot more business travel. So you go somewhere a week, and then actually you take the work back home, you deliver it in a different way. So this connection between business traveler compliance is going to be a lot more important actually overall. And I know that many of my peers feel like they should not be taking over business traveler, but I do think there's a lot of connection points between global mobility and business traveler compliance that they all need to fit together. And by doing that, of course, it will actually help us help the company be more compliant actually going forward. That's kind of my long-winded answer, which I'm not sure helps. But Lindsay, what do you want to correct me on?
No, I was going to agree. First, you have so much more visibility in kind of the consulting world on kind of what they're looking at, and yeah, there are two schools of thought on, you know, where is the value. But the big piece that I take away from that is it is going to be so essential that HRs and mobility specialists within a company, large or small, are prepared in their processes to change and make change, and be aware of the compliance that may be necessary. Have your team or your partners or your vendors be available. And to be fair, it's a little bit of a shameless plug for our platform, but I truly believe that, you know, having that technology to support you in these changing times goes back to whatever the answer is for that company. There's going to be an HR and mobility component that needs to be responsive and ready to go and compliant all at the same time.
Great, thank you both for those excellent answers. Moving along to the next question. What would be the best way to make a career in the global mobility field without having to know expat tax work? Most job postings require either experience or knowledge of expat tax work or tax equalizations.
Also a difficult question, because I think it depends a lot on the company. So if I look at a company like IBM, where we have the luxury of having a relatively big team because of the volumes actually what we are driving, we have really specialized teams which are looking at immigration, because we do a lot of stuff actually in-house. We have a lot of people who are doing the core mobility services. And then, of course, we have a tax team, which is much more working together with our payroll and finance tax teams around that. So for us, you can have a career in mobility easily by actually focusing on core mobility or immigration, and not necessarily having a lot of views on tax. Having said that, what we are trying to drive as well is actually a lot more cross-functional knowledge, because what we are finding is when we talk to our business, we talk to them about, hey, this is the immigration kind of things you need to know, or this is the tax things you need to know, or this is actually what is happening in the other space. And the clients, of course, is actually asking, why do you come with 3 people? Why can't you give me a total view on how I can change my projects and what I can do better actually around that? So therefore, you want to drive a lot more cross-functional knowledge in order to actually be providing more value add to the clients around that. So having a knowledge on all of these equations is really going to be important, because it also helps you, of course, to make connection points and be much more specific when you're actually having information around that. In smaller companies, maybe you need the tax component around it, because of course that's one of the major things actually what you're doing. But then again, there's a lot of company in the ecosystems out there which has nothing to do with tax, but they're really looking at co-mobility or technology or other parts around it. This is one of the, for me at least, the beauties of this industry. There's so much diversity out there and so much interest moving from one place actually to the next, and you can actually gain, like I was saying before, there's different experiences, there's different puzzle pieces to actually make your own career.
You could not have said that better.
All right, just taking a quick look at for the next questions. All right, so next question here the question is, for organizations that are early on in the global mobility journey, what are some common challenges leaders of the organization will face when asked to allow someone to take on new roles and thus, quote, lose them.
You said lose them?
Yeah.
Lose them meaning having attrition that the person is leaving?
It wasn't elaborated on when the question was asked, but yeah, I believe, I think given the context, maybe perhaps turnover.
Okay, so if we focus on that aspect around it, I think one of the biggest problems is that actually we send somebody somewhere and then we don't plan for the reintegration. And that basically means people actually don't feel valued. They feel like they have given something of themselves actually by going to a place, and then actually when they come back, they have to fight for roles around it. And I think many companies, including IBM, I think we can do all a better job in actually having a much more planned approach to what that role actually, why this role actually is going on assignment and what it is. And we've started as well actually looking at very simplistic steps actually and saying, what's the value, what's the reason for the assignment? Is it because it's a skill gap what you need? Is it because you need to deliver a project? Is it about your personal development? Is it for personal reasons? And all of these parts, you need to have different solutions in place. If you try to develop somebody, yes, hopefully that person actually can gain the experiences what you want from a culture perspective, from managing internationally, from living somewhere else, and then trying to figure out how that growth can actually help you in the role going forward or going backwards again. Very often, of course, that is not the case. Very often people come back and then they're in a similar kind of role than they were before. And then, of course, the question is, why have I done that? And the company actually has spent a lot of money in facilitating that. And people actually then are going to be headhunted away to other places because they appreciate things in a much better way. I think it is an important part. I think the first start, of course, is also for a company to measure what is actually the attrition rates, when are people leaving around that, what are the problems around it, how does it help actually for progression of that, how does it help you for diversity, inclusion, all of these kind of aspects around it. Because when you map data again around that, you can actually tell a story. And by telling a story, you are able to influence things. But if you just have individual cases, it's not going to help you because it's anecdotal kind of information, which is not going to help you going forward.
Great, thank you so much again, Horst. Another great answer. Well, Horst and Lindsay, I think that's going to do it for the audience Q&A. I just want to thank you both for elaborating a little bit more on the conversation you had earlier. And just overall, thank you both so much for the event today. It was really interesting and great to hear both of your stories and just kind of experiences over your careers. To our attendees, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And again, as a reminder, everyone will receive a link to download the recording of this event. If you would like to connect with Horst, there is a link to his LinkedIn page. And just a quick tease, our next Envoy Conversation event will be on October 1st. So please join us for then to hear more about managing employee experience in a remote setting. We'll be joined by practitioners from Nordstrom, SoFi, and Change Healthcare. The sign up for that should be coming very, very shortly. So with that, again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and have a great rest of your day. And Horst and Lindsay, thank you so much for the event today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all. Thanks, Horst.